things. And in Genesis we hear he did so in 6 days. And on the seventh day he rested. Now, before we get into the other things, 6 days does not necessarily mean, nor do we believe that it means 6 24-hour periods. We are not literalist readers of the Old Testament, especially anything before Abraham. And we do not necessarily believe that 24 hours, 6 times 24 hours is how the world was created. And obviously, we believe that the world was here for thousands and thousands of years before Christ. Nonetheless, on the seventh day, God rested. And it seems that this is something that Jesus forgot, or so it may seem to the people around him. Many times in the readings of our gospel, we hear that Christ does a miracle, and of course it seems that he's always doing them on the Sabbath. We talked today about the blind man receiving his sight, and of course the gospel reading tells us that it is on the Sabbath. Everyone around him in Judaic custom rests on the seventh day, on the Sabbath, which for the Jews, the Sabbath is what we call Sabbath. That's where the name comes from. But Christ himself seems to be doing a great deal of work. Now the problem here is that many people around him see the work that Jesus is doing as work, as something that we should not be doing. As helping people is something that we should not be doing even on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is simply for rest, though Christ points out many times that how many of you, he's talking to them now, how many of you have oxen and sheep and goats, and you take them out to the water so that they can drink their water, because if you don't, what's going to happen? You're going to die, or they're going to get sick. And so that isn't considered work because you have to do it. Or it is something that affects your pocketbook, and so it's something that we have to do. Or we overlook the rule, shall we say, of the Sabbath day. And so many times we see that Christ is arguing with the people around him, telling them or pointing out to them that this miracle that just happened should not cause us to think of, oh my God, it is the Sabbath day, we should be resting, but really we should be talking about, oh my God, this is a great miracle, glory be to God. And that should be the response of the people around him. What is interesting in today's gospel reading is that it takes us all the way back to creation. St. John Chrysostom, St. Irenaeus, and I believe St. Basil as well, interpret this gospel reading as to say that the blind man was born without eyes. And as Father Chris and I were talking about this, I said, who was born without eyes? And he says, Andrea Bocelli. Apparently he was born without eyes. It is not common, but fairly common among, I guess, certain people, or genetically, or what, I don't know. But that somehow this man was born without eyes. And so, Christ spits into the clay. He takes clay, he takes earth, as he did in Genesis, and he spits on it, puts them on the eyes, where the eyes should be of the blind man, and he tells him to go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. And he goes. Now you've got to imagine here a little bit of the scenery. This blind man who has been born without eyes has been sitting there for years. Everybody knows him as the blind man. In fact, when he receives his eyes and is walking back, everybody questions, this is the man that was there, sitting there for so long, the blind man. It looks like him, pretty sure it's him. Let's see if it is him. They even call his parents to make sure that it is him, and they say, yes, it is him. So imagine now this blind man walking without being able to see, with clay on his eyes, through the city, because the pool of Siloam is on one end of the city, and the temple where he found the blind man is on another part of the city. So he's walking through the city to the pool of Siloam, and then walking back. Imagine the scene of people watching this man do this. but it is for us a remembrance, a sign, a calling us to never forget that Christ is the Creator, is the one who was present at creation, is the one who formed humanity from dust and made us and then breathed into us his breath so that we can receive our spirit and we are what we are today. Reminds us that Christ is not simply a human being that was chosen by God, is not someone who has been blessed by God to do the work of God, but that he is God himself, and that he was present at creation and controls creation even to today. By creating from dust and breathing into or spinning into the clay, forming eyes and forming humanity again through this new creation of Christianity and belief in him. What is interesting is the response of some of the Jews to the young man who was blind when he says to them, "Why are you asking me how he did it again? Maybe you want to be his disciples." And they said, we are disciples of Moses, where we know that Moses spoke to God. What's interesting is that they don't see God before them. They do not see the miracle of creation that is done before them, and they do not realize that he is speaking to God himself as Moses was speaking to God himself. And so what can we take from all of this beautiful story? First of all, that God does not rest. He may have rested from creation in the story of Genesis, but God does not rest. He continues to work. He continues to create. Millions and millions and millions of light years away, we know that creation is still going. It is still creating. The world is still creating through the many different ways that through eruptions of volcanoes, through flooding. Some of the beaches have been eroded on Toronto Island. This is all part of the creation and recreation of the world. God continues to work. He continues to work in our lives through creation and recreation. And he continues to work in the universe as a whole, but especially within our soul when we are asking for the work of God and his grace within our lives. That is first and foremost. Secondly, that Jesus Christ is God. That it is God who came to this world as a child. It is God himself who came and lived among us and taught us. It is God himself who was crucified, and God himself who resurrected, so that we can once again be in the kingdom. It is not a prophet. He was not someone who was chosen by God as a human being. You look good to me. You're a nice guy. Do the work that I asked you. But that he was God, and it is God himself who did this work for us. And finally, I guess we can receive from the story that God is present in front of us. That we should always see God present in all things. That we should always see God present in his creation. That we see God present in one another. And when we see God present in creation, then hopefully we have a high respect for the creation around us. And when we see God present among ourselves, in front of our eyes, within ourselves, within the people that we are talking to, then hopefully we have a high deal of respect for one another as well. For within each of us, God dwells. God does not rest. We are not to rest from doing the good works of God. And let us always continue to do them without thinking about what is correct and what is incorrect, or what is straight tradition or what is culture, but to always do good, for there is no rule against doing good among the world.